Hey Wargamers, today I want to talk about specific loadouts for Tau commanders. Now, last time we talked about the different types of commanders, their strengths and weaknesses, and what types of stratagems you might want to use with them. If you haven't watched that video yet, please do so. It's going to make a whole lot more sense watching this video if you've seen that first one first. So there's a link in the description below for you to do that. While you're at it, if you like this video, if you like that video, go ahead, hit like, subscribe, and that way you don't miss any of my upcoming battle reports, unit reviews, or other 40K content. All right, so let's get into it. Basically, today I'm going to be talking about specific weapon loadouts, and so there's really just this focus on weapons, but we'll also talk about particular types of variants and which types of seps these commanders are going to function best in. So one of the things that is really important when talking about commanders is that we are super limited in the number of commanders that we can actually bring. A lot of the time I'm going to focus on things that are the most points efficient. This time I'm really going to focus more on maximization instead of optimization. And what I mean by that is I'm more concerned about the total amount of damage being done and less concerned about how many points it costs. And the reason for that is because we can only bring 3 commanders maximum, but it's a little bit worse than that because it's 1 commander per detachment, whereas pretty much anyone else now can bring as many as they want, up to 3 within 1 detachment. So the number of commanders that you have is going to be low, lower than other types of HQs and other armies a lot of the time. And so we really are concerned about just getting the most out of those few commanders that we have and less concerned about how many points they cost, because it's not like we're going to be able to buy more commanders. The idea between optimization is that you make up for a potentially lower damage output by just buying more of them, but we can't do that with commanders. So that's an important caveat to understand when we're talking about commanders versus other types of units, is that we are, at least I am, more concerned about maximization than optimization from a points perspective. So with that in mind, there are 4 main types of weapons that I'm particularly interested in for commanders. The first is the Fusion Blaster. This is your heavy hitter, it's your melt-a-gun basically. It's going to do a lot of damage to single targets. The second is the Cyclic Ion Blaster. This is a generalist weapon. You have different modes of firing, but it's a good combination of strength, AP, volume of fire, damage. It does a lot of different things fairly well. The third weapon is the Missile Pod, and this is something that before I have not been I haven't been a big fan of the Missile Pod, largely because of the points cost associated with it. But the Missile Pod in this context, especially within the Codex, is not quite as good as a Cyclic Ion Blaster, but it has a much better range. And then the fourth weapon is actually a flamer. It's a relic, the Thermo Neutronic Projector, and that is a weapon that is, again, a generalist weapon, but we can only bring 1 of them. So when we look at the stat lines of these different weapons, we see Fusion Blasters, range 18, assault 1, strength 8, minus 4 AP, d6 damage, taking the higher of a double roll if you're within half range. Cyclic Ion Blaster, depending on how you fire it. If you're firing it in standard mode, it's strength 7, minus 1 AP, 1 damage. If you're firing it in overcharge mode, strength 8, d3 damage, but if you roll a 1, you are taking a wound. For the Thermo Neutronic Projector, that's strength 6, minus 1 AP, 2 damage flamer. Really, that's a really solid weapon. I think it's easy to underestimate that, but assuming that you're able to pull that flamer into range, you're doing a fair amount of damage with that fairly consistently. And this is different than a normal flamer. I would never recommend a normal flamer on a commander, primarily because you're losing out on that sweet 2-up ballistic skill. Because it's an auto-hit weapon. You can get the same output on a crisis suit or whatever. You don't need a commander for that. But here, the Thermo Neutronic Projector works well with some of the movement associated with the Coldstar commander, and it also is a signature system, meaning that we can only put it on a character. So we're not going to be putting this on a crisis suit or anything like that because we just can't. So your commander is really the platform that you have to use for the Thermo Neutronic Projector. And then the fourth weapon is, again, that missile pod that's strength 7, minus 1 AP, D3 damage. So it's a worse version of a cyclic ion blaster because it's only assault 2 as opposed to assault 3. So, you know, we're getting less output for a more expensive weapon. But yeah, anyway, so when we look at how those different profiles stack out, we see that, again, the cyclic ion blaster is going to be better than the missile pod. The cyclic ion blaster is also going to be better than the fusion blaster for targets that are strength 7 or below strength 7. And then the Thermo Neutronic Projector is going to be better than the cyclic ion blaster. But again, we can only take one of those. So we're definitely going to be taking Thermo Neutronic Projectors at some point. In other cases, we're going to be taking cyclic ion blasters to fill that niche. Moving on to specific loadouts, I've identified 4 archetypes that represent the loadouts you might want to bring most commonly in a list. It's certainly not an exhaustive list of archetypes or of loadouts, and there may be things that work better for you. If there is, please let me know in the comments below. But these are the types of things that I'm thinking about when I'm making a list. Let's start with what I'm calling the Gunline Commander. It's an XV8 with 4 missile pods. Really, the idea here is that you are deploying this guy in the back line. He's not going to be moving around taking objectives, anything like that, at least not primarily as his main function. His main function is going to be hang out with your heavy hitters, maybe broadsides, maybe some riptides, maybe a block of infantry, whatever you want that's essentially a more anchored unit on your gun line. He's going to hang out with them for turn 1. He's going to be able to call Cao Yun, and he's also going to offer things like command and control node to help out those units right away and really give a good punch on turn 1. The reason why this is an XV8 commander as opposed to anything else is because the XV8 doesn't need to be deep striking. It doesn't need to be running around like a Coldstar does, anything like that. The XV8 is, you know, our least expensive option, and he is just there to do this sort of thing. I equip him with missile pods because he, again, is not going to be jumping around the board. He's a gunline commander, and so I really need that range. So I'm sacrificing some elements of offensive capability for the, you know, essentially the defensive ability of having range. So he's a long-range commander and hanging out with other long-range units in a gun line early on. So his strength is that he's able to do that. He's relatively conservative. He's safe. But the downside, of course, is that he's expensive and, you know, no risk, no reward type of thing. He's not very risky, and so you're not going to get as much out of him as you might with some of these other archetypes. As far as which types of seps you might want to consider bringing this with, I think Tau is really the strongest choice. He's going to synergize fairly well with you know, the 5s to hit an Overwatch. That's, you know, doubling your Overwatch capability, and having him there with all of his 8 missile pod shots is going to work out fairly well for you. The slightly more aggressive version of the Gunline Commander is the Frontline Commander. This is going to be an XV8 in Iridium or an Enforcer suit with either 4 cyclic ion blasters or 4 fusion blasters. Again, like we talked about, they have different rules. Take a fusion blaster suit if you are planning on really, you know, hitting some high durability, low model count units, or take cyclic ion blasters if you're looking for something a little bit more generalist. And which of those two is going to be better is going to depend on your overall army construction. If you're lacking one, that should be what you take. You know, having all your eggs in one basket is, in terms of firepower, probably not the best idea. So if you need fusion blasters in your list, take the fusion blaster version. The idea here is that you're going to have this commander on the front line. He's going to be moving around, taking objectives, putting pressure on the enemy, and so that's why we don't need that extra range of the missile pod. Again, he's going to deploy next to some heavy hitters, but they're going to be things that are a little bit more mobile, ghost keels, riptides, whatever you have that's going to be moving forward turn 1, he's going to deploy alongside them and kind of help them out with things like command and control node. A notable change in this loadout is that I'm talking about taking 4 cyclic ion blasters as opposed to 3 cyclic ion blasters and a multi-tracker. The change with the codex requiring multi-trackers to only work when you're targeting a unit of 5 or more means that you have a limited value in taking that multi-tracker. You're not going to be able to use that multi-tracker every single time that you fire the weapon, and so I think it's better just to go all out on the cyclic ion blasters and make sure you have marker light support. That will make up for the lack of the multi-tracker, and overall you're going to have more output. Again, maximizing and not necessarily optimizing the commander. Because of this, it's going to be really important that the commander is screened, whether that's with drones that are running up alongside it or with those Riptides, Ghost Keels, Stealth Suits, things that are deploying up front. Those are going to need to be there in order to protect that commander. Otherwise, you're leaving him open to targeting. As far as which SEPs are going to work best with the Frontline Commander, I think Vior Law is a really solid choice because Vior Law allows them to advance and fire assault weapons as normal, and these are both assault weapons. So you're going to be able to get a fair amount of movement out of him. He's going to be able to be fairly tactically flexible because of that sept tenet. But other things like Farsight Enclaves can be good, especially if you are switching out those Fusion Blasters for something like Fusion Blades. Farsight Enclaves can be a good one as well. Tau, also not a bad idea because, who's going to complain about better Overwatch? Especially if you're in the front line, you're more likely to be assaulted, and so having that ability to have a little bit more reliable Overwatch is certainly not a bad thing. The next archetype is the Deep Strike Commander. This is going to be an Enforcer suit with either 4 Fusion Blasters or 3 Fusion Blasters and a Thermo Neutronic Projector. I really like this loadout, but it's really not attractive any longer because of the changes to deep striking in the most recent FAQ. So because you're no longer able to deep strike outside of your deployment zone turn 1, you're losing a lot of the ability to use this commander effectively. And so really I think the better option than the Deep Strike Commander is now what I'm calling the Brawler, which is just a Coldstar commander with either 4 Fusion Blasters or 3 Fusion Blasters and a Thermo Neutronic Projector. Overall, I like to think about this suit as being a mini Yvara. The Fusion Blasters combined with the Super Flamer have a lot of that same functionality as Yvara does, but instead of being a giant Riptide, it's a commander, and that's pretty darn sweet. In general, I think the main trick to using the Brawler suit is to keep it supported. Changes again to deep striking mean that you can't just run the Coldstar commander up the board and deep strike drones in to support it. So instead, turn 1, he probably is going to have to play a little bit more conservatively, basically hanging out with some units, popping command control node, Kaoyun, multi-spectrum sensor suite, all sorts of buffs like that. He can be a little bit of a buff junkie turn 1 and help give you a little bit more of an alpha strike during that turn, and then really go in turn 2 when you are actually going to be able to deep strike drones in to support him. Otherwise, if you're able to deploy things like Ghost Kills, Stealth Suits, have a Yvara, Remora drones, anything that's going to be able to move or be upfield early on in turn 1 is going to be a good support unit for this, and so he can work, carefree that first turn still, even with the restriction on deep striking, if you have these units. If you don't have those units, again, you're going to want to be a little bit more conservative because you can't support him the way that he needs to. If you run the Coldstar up the field without support, he's going to be targeted right away, and you're going to be out a fair number of points and really not get your bang for your buck on that one. Again, thinking about which types of SEPs the Brawler loadout is going to work best for, Vior Law is going to be the one that you need to take if you want to take the Thermo Neutronic Projector. If you want to switch those Fusion Blasters out for Fusion Blades, you're going to go with Farsight, and again, Tau is kind of a obvious choice. You're not going to get as much from the Tau sept option here because your Flamer's hitting automatically anyway, but still, again, Tau is fairly good. This is the loadout that I've been using the most lately is 3 Fusion Blasters and a Thermo Neutronic Projector. It's a little bit more sensitive to mistakes, and so if you're worried about messing up, forgetting something, go with the Fusion Blaster loadout instead. That's going to be a little bit easier to use. You don't have to get as close. You can play a little less risky, and it's going to work out fairly well. It's a little bit more expensive again, but I think that it's a really good option. All right, so those are 4 different loadouts for Tau commanders that I think would work well in a lot of different lists. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is there a loadout that you prefer to any of those 4? Or if you use one of those, let me know what it is. Again, thanks for watching, and of course, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, this video was made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you also enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there. Special thanks to Max Harrison, NoExcusesPanda, Paul Lueders, TauOswell, Nick Steele, Jared Egeler, Brian Mann, Jake Johnson, Eric Jackson, Cristofer Sarale, Youhei Penguin, Andy M. Young, Peter Benjamin Parker, and Giovanni DiMaggio.